behalf of my colleagues. Professor Mark Brown was meant to give this talk, but he sends his apologies. He's actually engaged in another meeting at the same time. So he got me to organize this presentation in his stead. But hopefully it'll be enjoyable, and we have about a half hour here. So I'm going to go through my slides fairly slow. I know for the session in general, we were talking there to Tim, and he was pointing out the chat boxes there. So make sure to use it if there's any questions you have during. I don't mind stopping as well, and if you have any specific questions. So the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen, and maybe if someone could just indicate once they can see, maybe it's not the heaven. I'm assuming it's now shared. I will go to my current slide. So, as I say, my name is Croher McLaughlin, and it's great to be here. It's a pleasure to be presenting to you all on micro-credentials at Dublin City University. And to give a kind of overview of this talk before I commence, we've got three really lines of inquiry we want to use to frame this session. The first is to talk a little bit about TCU itself as an institution. Some of you are probably quite familiar with TCU, but we're going to give you the context and talk about maybe our story when it comes to micro-credentials also. Secondly, we're going to look at current research, and we're actually involved in several projects at the minute that we think would be interesting for showing some of the trends that are occurring within this research context and research space as well. And then third, we want to kind of help frame the rest of this discussion by looking to the future and talking about some of the core questions that we see on our side as very important strategically that people keep on mind and consider. First of all, this slide it's a lovely slide because it's a very important point in so many things in life, but particularly when we're talking about education. The idea that micro-credentials are not in and of themselves a big idea. They should be in the service of big ideas. We can see behind there the Sustainable Development Goals, which is obviously a roadmap really for humanity in the 21st century. But it is important that we take that framing from the very start. When we're talking about credentialing approaches, qualifications, we want to actually talk about what these big ideas are. Not only what is it shaping and how it's being shaped, but why is it being shaped in that specific way? So these are all very important contextual issues to discuss first of all. And now to talk about the DCU story, as I say, some of you are probably quite familiar with DCU. It's in Dublin City, that's our name, of course, Dublin City University. And this is a picture of our campus, which we are all very much missing, I must say. It's been 3 or 4 months since we've been face-to-face on our campus. But it's on the north side of Dublin, quite near the airport. And another thing that's probably important to know about DCU is that it's quite a young university. We're actually celebrating our 40th year this year. But from inception, DCU was very much a strategic university. And in addition to that, we've always been at the forefront of when we're talking about digital distance learning. The university has never been afraid of actually talking about these issues and really driving forward with a lot of these changes, pioneering in a lot of senses. So one example here is our DCU Connected program. And you can see this advertisement, but it's a very well regarded distance education program. We have students learning from all over Ireland and some students from all over the world who are actually doing undergraduate degrees at the minute online. So you can see that this is a space we were already in long before discussions about micro-credentials, for example, came into being. We were always talking about distance education. In addition to this, something that's probably somewhat newer and something that I've been privileged to actually work on is we've also really put into the MOOC field as well. So we have a strategy with future learning, which I'll discuss in a moment. But I was lucky enough to work on this project, Irish 101, and it's a series of Irish language MOOCs. They're actually available right now on the Future Learning platform, and many of them are available. And we have over 80,000 learners from around the world who have registered to do this course from January 2018 onwards. And sometimes people are flabbergasted when they hear this because they think the Irish language, like how on earth, like I didn't know there was an Irish language. But it's an example of how DCU have really tried to pioneer into this space. We saw that there is actually a huge market for people to learn about the Irish language and culture around the world. And in addition to that, this is a really transformative opportunity as well. So we've a whole research agenda in that sphere too. But MOOCs have been something that we've been looking at and working very closely on. Now, I mentioned FutureLearn, and this slide just highlights the nature of our strategic partnership with FutureLearn. So we're one of a handful of universities actually around the world which have this sort of status with FutureLearn, where we're actually offering master's level qualifications through the platform. So this is used to kind of sketch out contextual information that we're talking about an existing relationship, and very much a strategic one. Now this slide, Mark described it as eye candy, but it's actually to illustrate something important also, which is when we're talking about DCU and when we're talking about institutions, I think in general, it's important to contextualize where we sit. And something that we've been looking at within micro-credentials very strongly is the fact that this is the national framework of qualifications in Ireland. So you can see it's quite detailed, and it lists and structures different types of qualifications. We've always placed huge emphasis on anything that we do being potentially credit bearing. So for example, we've been in that space, there's a lot of discourse around digital badges, micro-credentials. I'll discuss this towards the end. But in addition to that, we've always wanted to treat whatever work we're doing in national frameworks. And then in addition to this, to sketch probably something that my colleagues are going to be talking about as well, is the European level also. So a really interesting development recently was about the European Common Micro-Credential Framework, which has been launched. You can see some of the parties that are involved in this towards the bottom. And what's super interesting about this, of course, is that I think this is the direction that all these discussions are heading in, towards standardization, towards actually defining and looking at what specific contextual factors that we're going to be talking about. You can see here, for example, when we're looking at the Common Micro-Credential Framework, that the study time involved, for example, is very much specified between 100 and 150 hours, and where they sit within a European qualification framework as well, what specific levels they're at, how they link to ECTS credits. So these are bigger discussions, and it's something that we want to reflect on towards the end also, is this concept of the trends that are pushing it when we look at it not only nationally, but internationally as well, and how these elements linked together. And I'd say this is an example of one of our really innovative qualifications that have just actually been launched. This is our FinTech master's qualification, which is now available on the FutureLearn platform. It launched in February, but you have students from around the world who are actually undertaking this qualification. So again, this is an example of a specific subject that we felt was extremely interesting and extremely important and pertinent. And if you go to the FutureLearn website, you'll see examples of master's qualifications that are available now. And you'll notice that there's only really a handful of universities up there. Eton University and Queensland University also. So we can see straight away that there's really a handful of organizations that are involved at this strategic level. Another element we mentioned, because when we're talking about not only platforms and when we're talking about strategic partnerships, we also need to talk about the means through which micro-credentials are delivered. So we know Digitary is a very important platform to DCU. It's actually based here in Dublin. We have a strategic partnership, but this actually provider is now, I think it's a preferred provider in Canada, and it's also very large in Australasia. So we need to think about this as very much a weave. We have on the one hand the institutional actors, universities, but we also have MOOC providers, platform providers, and then we also have digital solution providers. So these are all contextual elements that are really important to account for. And that kind of finishes me up on DCU's story, for example, or our sort of narrative of where we've come from and where we've come to. But in addition to that, of course, we did want to discuss our current research agenda, which is pretty extensive, and a lot of the kind of projects that we've been looking at are very much cross-pollinating. So we've been making sure that there's a lot of like transfer between the different projects that we're involved in, but many of them fit into the micro-credential space. So I'm going to mention a few. The first one here is the DigiHE project. This is a project which is actually run by the European University Association, and it's a very close strategic partner of DCU. DCU is an active member, and there's actually been a survey which I think finishes up this week, but it has had respondents from all over Europe. And it has been, it has many questions on the survey relate to micro-credentials and micro-credentialing approaches also. One that's very important is SkillNet. So whenever we're talking about these discussions, an interesting voice that's sometimes absent is actually that of employers. So this is an important partnership we've had. We received some funding recently to actually query employers and employees. I'll show some of the examples from student, or some of the examples of the questions that we have had so far. But SkillNet is a really important partnership for DCU because it looks into this in an applied sense and as an applied example. So this is an example of research that actually is really critical. It was undertaken as part of the Quality and Qualifications Ireland framework, and kind of remarkable results in a sense. Now you'll note the question is phrased, how important are digital badges during the recruitment process? But you'll see that the overwhelming majority of recruiters said they're not important, and about a quarter said that they were important. Now, the reason that this is quite interesting as well is we could ask, what would it be like if it were phrased in the future tense, for example? Would it be somewhat different? How important will it be in the future? There were items relating to that on the survey, but it's an important issue worthy of discussion is the employer voice as well, and also employees. So these are the kind of topics of the survey that we've launched as part of SkillNet. You can see that there are separate sections for employers and employees. We really wanted to get into the weeds and understand not only how familiar employers are, say, with micro-credentials, but in addition to that, we wanted to look at what are the potential uses they see, what are the factors that would actually influence whether or not they'd adopt it within their specific context. And then on an employee side also, something that was obviously a little bit different was to talk about how much they understood or were familiar with micro-credentials, and then engagement, CPD, also very important issues. So these are all kind of focusing on that element too, that it's not purely academic, but that in addition to that, we're focusing on the workplace and actually seeing A, how much awareness there is of these topics, but then B, when we move beyond that, what are the kind of drivers at that level too. So I know that our colleagues here from Finland who are involved in our ECIU project, the European Consortium of Innovative Universities, are probably going to mention this, but this is a really interesting project that we've been involved in with about 12 partners all across Europe. And this is a really transformative project. Essentially, we're all coming together and we're going to be implementing, hopefully, micro-credentials and perhaps innovative new learning approaches as well. But within the ECIU University, we have a fairly strategic role also, which is that we're actually looking and surveying at attitudes and approaches to micro-credentials. So this is a survey that's just gone live actually. And we have about 90 responses from all across our universities, our partner universities within the project. And an example of a question here, one of the first questions in the survey is about based on your own knowledge of micro-credentials. And we wanted to understand how different persons in different roles would articulate and describe their own understanding of micro-credentials, what they are, what they aren't as well, and to share maybe some very preliminary analysis on this question. We did note in the responses that a lot of confusion is present at different levels of academia in terms of what a micro-credential is, what distinguishes it from a short course. I'm going to talk very briefly about definitions towards the end. But these are critical questions because we're often finding that lecturers, support staff, administrative staff are coming back and saying that they're not sure what a micro-credential is. And if they're not sure what a micro-credential is, a knock-on question will be how sure will people that we want to take micro-credentials actually be of what a micro-credential is also. So that's a very strategic project that we're involved in. And all of these projects, the reason they're illustrated is I'm sure you can all see the common trends in between each different strand and each different project that's involved there. But it also weaves back to our narrative about our institution and the fact that our institution is very much a kind of strategic one that's looking at specific opportunities. And to do that, a really important element is to actually look towards the future and to see the future as well as not just something that occurs, but it's also something that is shaped and that we play really a central role in shaping also. So mindful of the fact that there were going to be other speakers in this session too, we wanted to actually discuss this to look to the future and what are the kind of core questions that exist right now regarding a future of micro-credential approaches. And we have three sorts of major issues here. The first is definitions, and the second are drivers and attractors. And Mark had a lovely point yesterday because he noted that, when we're talking about drivers, push factors, the reasons people do things, attractors, pull factors, the reasons people want to do things as well are also important. But then a critical third aspect is the language we use and the types of metaphors we use. So often metaphors, when we're using them, reveal an awful lot about how we think about things. And obviously there are different types of metaphors as well. So this is a really critical question that comes up all the time. I mean, how exactly are we going to discuss micro-credentials and where do they fit in within this wider space? And what kinds of metaphors do we use to talk about them, with an awareness that no metaphor is neutral. All metaphors are grounded in some sort of assumption, sometimes implicit, sometimes explicit, sometimes both, but that it's important to think about it in that kind of phase or framework and the sort of thinking process as well. So this is a really useful schematic that Mark has developed, and he's labeling but it's a very useful way of thinking about it. When we're talking about definitions, there are two axes. On one hand, he has the bundled versus unbundled axis. And then on the other hand, he has the credit-bearing versus non-credit-bearing axis. So you can see up there that in the upper left-hand corner, formal degrees, for example, a traditional third-level degree would fit into that space. So it's bundled and it's credit-bearing. And then if we head down, we might see structured short courses, which are bundled, they're all together, but they're also non-credit bearing, so many of them don't actually yield credit. Then in the upper right-hand corner, we'll see where there's really quite a bit of potential here about stackable micro-credentials. So they're unbundled, you can do one, or you can do two, as many as you want, and that they are credit bearing. So they're actually, as we say, woven into our qualification frameworks. That's a really important point. And then down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see non-formal badges and certificates. So these are things that are both unbundled, so they're not, a college degree, but they're also non-credit bearing. So you can see that they're, maybe within that framework, they exist in a different space. And the reason that it's important to talk about it in this light is that we really need to understand what we mean when we mean a micro-credential, because and this is, again, something that has come up across our research agenda, has been the number of times people will say, you mean a digital badge, and the answer is that it might mean a digital badge, but it's unclear, so the actual target demographic, we might say, of a stackable micro-credential might be extremely different to a non-formal badge and certificate space, but they're often, pardon the kind of use of the word again, but they're often bundled together in a way that's probably not quite appropriate. So we need more conceptual clarity about different types of qualifications for different types of purposes and for different types of experiences as well, and within lifelong learning, in reskilling for the job market, that these are all different or differing, perhaps slightly differing spaces that really need to be clarified in more detail. Now, when it comes to these questions, an important note as well is the fact that none of this exists in a vacuum. And I think this is probably one of the critical points. This is a recent paper by Shane Ralston about micro-credentials and the neoliberal learning economy. So the fact that when we're talking about unbundling, we often have to consider, what are we unbundling? What are we unbundling it for? And who are we unbundling it for? And perhaps also for what purpose? So this is a really provocative and very good paper that talks about this in detail, and that a lot of these questions, and as we say, these implicit assumptions, really need to be questioned when we're talking about them within the academic sphere, and when we're talking about different stakeholders within this sphere as well. These are critical questions and critical elements. So we have a few questions and metaphors to finish up with. This first one, in Ireland, we call this a shopping trolley. I'm sure it's called a lot of things around Europe. But we really need to ask, do we want to see students essentially become consumers? And what I mean by that is that, students will walk down the shelves, they'll pick this credential, they'll pick that credential, they'll put it all in their trolley, and they'll head to the checkout, because that itself is a metaphor that's based very much on a particular economic logic. And it's also based quite strongly on a consumeristic way of looking at the world, that students will pick and choose, that they'll develop their own repertoires. These are not bad things, but what's important to consider when we're talking about them is that they're also not neutral things. And as Ralston argues, and many others would argue, when we're talking about education, sometimes there's actually an extra level to that. It's not necessarily a consumer product. So we need to be careful when we're talking about these metaphors also. A second issue is one that's actually come up in some of the projects we've been working on, this concept of a wallet, backpack. And these are interesting metaphors as well, because again, they actually have a certain logic baked into them. So, for example, a wallet implies currency, it implies capital, it implies movement. There's nothing wrong with the metaphor. That's an important point, but that we do need to talk about these assumptions. And particularly, again, if we go back to that schematic that Mark developed, where our different qualification frameworks are fitting in and for what purpose. This is a critical question, and that's going to confront us as we move further down this path. And then the last common metaphor is the passport, and again, really nothing wrong with it, really nice one, but something we should ask is, millions of people around the world don't have a passport, they don't have citizenship, and the vast majority of human beings have never been on an airplane. So when we're talking about travel, when we're talking about transport, movement, we have to bring these questions in. They're not neutral. We have to talk about who's going where and for what purpose. So these are big questions, but as you saw at the start, when we're talking about these big ideas, we need to put micro-credentials, like any other concept, within that specific space. It's very important to do this and to talk and to challenge some of these questions and confront them openly also. So essentially, in conclusion, I've only got a couple of slides here. The first one is about being around the table. So this is an important point Mark was making, is the fact that you really do want to be around these tables. You want to be in these discussions, talking to your colleagues. It's the only way that any of us learn. He also has a proverb. He claims it's an Irish proverb. I'm not sure if it really is, but about that if you're not around the table, you might be on the menu. So there's a little bit of that involved also, that as an institution, we want to be part of these conversations. But in addition to that, not only do we want to be part of these conversations, we also want to shape them. And then given this context as well, the context that we're in, it's important to note this also, that we are European. All of us are European here, and that we actually, a lot of these questions, these big issues, are going to be dealt with at a European level, and not only dealt with, because that sounds a little bit simplistic. It's not that they're going to be dealt with, but they're going to be shaped. So we have to move beyond our national boundaries, while also being aware of the contexts that we exist in. So we exist in our national framework, our European framework also. So what I will say is thank you, or I'll also use my native Irish as well, Gur Machaliv, at the same time. And I apologize as well, because I know my camera went off during. And what I will do is I will stop sharing, and hopefully there will be time for questions too. Apologies again, everyone. I'm not sure what went wrong there, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Kandhar. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask before we move on to our next presentation.
Hi, may I speak? This is Karine.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, I really appreciate your presentation, and in particular, I loved in the future section that you had this whole critical issue around language and metaphors. My question to you is, what are some of the current language and metaphors that you are conceptualizing when you're thinking about micro-credential? And I'm speaking of this, I mean, I'm not a European, I'm actually a Canadian, and I'm kind of interested in knowing what is any initial thinkings around these questions, because I think it's clearly for me from attending other presentations on micro-credential today, it might look a bit rigid looking from the outside, looking at the way that Europeans are trying to codify micro-credentials. So I'm kind of curious to see if you have any initial thoughts about, metaphors that might be useful going forward.
Well, thanks very much for the question. And I mean, I think one that springs straight to mind, and I think it's a nice one, is that this idea of an ecology, and particularly the idea that we might be talking about very different. It's not necessarily going to be a jungle, but sometimes when you hear people talk about it, it does seem a bit like a jungle. You know, I'm just catching up with the chat that's there, and I noticed that there's a lot of questions about exactly how would you define it? Is a badge a micro credential? And part of the issue that comes up there definitely is having those metaphors that can actually reflect the diversity that's involved in this issue, while also being coherent enough, I think, to constitute a metaphor, because I think that would be an issue, I think, that arises. But that's why I think an ecological approach is a nice way to put it, because we can think about it. Different institutions are involved in different spaces, doing different things, and that will be perhaps comparable, but at the same time, they might not be equivalent, or they may not be identical. So I would go for the ecology metaphor. I think it's a nice one. It gives enough flexibility for people to talk about it individually and also as well comparably. I think that's a really important thing, is because it strikes me that confusion that's definitely emerging is, well, if I take a micro-credential with this institution, what does that mean at that institution? You know, so even when we're talking about unbundled, stackable things like this, we need to have some metric of stacking them, or maybe not a metric, but we need to have some sort of understood definition. So I think, as you say, it's a critical question, and language and metaphor are really the center of it as well. But I would go for not the law of the jungle, but I do think that viewing it almost as a space with many different types of qualification that can then somehow be related to each other. I think that's probably the future.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you answered my question. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the question.
Ira, may I ask something?
Of course.
Just under what conditions do you regard digital badges as also micro-credentials? What do you just request to have to make it a digital credential?
Yes, I mean, this is a really interesting question, and in a sense, I guess a line that could be drawn, and I think it's drawn in the schematic, is the idea of, is it credit bearing? So, for example, one could imagine, you know, I'm sure everyone on this call has gotten a digital badge for one thing or another. You know, digital badge could be contributing, it can be, you know, asking a question, answering a question. You know, a digital badge can fit into that space. But perhaps then, if we're taking that approach, then a way to think of a micro-credential might be that it's credit bearing or credit yielding, so that it fits within a framework where it can be essentially not only validated, but also that it represents a specific sort of outcome. So that might be a fine distinction. But I think that it's an important sort of line there, is the concept of credentialing. Because I think badges, and it's part of, we actually conducted a literature review at the start of our project with the ECIU, and we were very surprised how much more prevalent the phrase digital badge was than micro-credential. And I think that the reason for that is because a digital badge is essentially kind of the danger of what we were just talking about. It's a catch-all term, and everything and anything can be a digital badge. So then the question becomes, well, then what is a micro-credential? And I would say that the credit yielding aspect could be the distinction, and that it's more structured perhaps and more formal. So I don't know, does that answer the question? Or?
I think it's the best expression I heard until now, credit bearing, because it has got the EC test unit, it has got assessment, it has got the same metadata as the digital credentials should possess. So the digital metadata make it a credential, and the credit bearing just express everything which is necessary. It's a very good idea. Thank you.
No problem. Are there any other questions?
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Now we can move to George Bubak from the EDTU, who will be talking to us about the MOOC consortium as well. So George, please take the stage.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. One moment. Let me see if it works like that. Yeah. Okay, so I hope that you can hear me well. Otherwise, please notify me that I put the camera off as well. I'm going to talk about the what already was introduced in the former presentation about the common micro-credentials framework that is being developed by our European MOOC consortium. And to give you first the context of the development of CMF, the MOOC consortium was established by EDTU in 2017, end of 2017, as we felt the need for a better representation of European MOOCs and expertise in that field than was currently the case, because Europe was very much divided by language and offerings of MOOCs by country, and therefore didn't have a very strong voice, also not towards the European Commission, as well as a voice as European MOOC providers in general. So we approached several bigger MOOC platforms with the idea of building this European MOOC consortium. And then we had the launch of EMC end of 2017 with inclusion of FutureLearn, Fun in France, OpenAbed, EduOpen, and Myriada X. And together we formulated the objectives for this EMC. But most importantly, also, we are immediately representing more than 3,000 MOOCs in Europe and also more than 400 higher education institutions, and using 5 different languages, European languages. So we have, altogether with EMC, a bigger impact. And this is very important, as EMC is the vehicle now for this European MOOC consortium with 400 higher education institutions that are endorsing this CMF. And that is quite a distinctive factor in our initiative in relation to other smaller projects or initiatives. To relate this very strongly to the labor market, we also involved employment agencies and companies in a project called the European MOOC Consortium for the Labor Market. And I'm going to talk about this in a second more. First of all, the European MOOC Consortium has its main goal is to increase the awareness and the use of digital education and MOOCs within Europe. That's our general goal. But we want also to increase the impact and the exposure of all the MOOC platforms together, as well as separately by cooperation. So we bring them together to share expertise, but also trying to find connections between the MOOC offerings and make them into programs together in consultation. Further, we want to make MOOCs a widely considered option for employers and employees as part of the educational system. So now it's being used as in addition, like taking a separate MOOC, but it's not so much seen as a real offering for continuing education. And therefore, we want to make programs that are fit to the market and being in line with what is demand driven. And it's especially therefore that we have created this dialogue with social partners and civil society organizations and employment agencies within the EMC labor market project to make MOOCs fit for the labor market. Why is it so of great importance? Well, first of all, it was concluded in the EU Education Training Monitor 2017 that lifelong learning, continuing education, and continuous professional development are actually underdeveloped in large parts of the EU, realizing also that 40% of European employers face problems with recruiting employees having the right qualifications and the right skills for the demands of the economy, especially also the more digitalized economy. In that sense, we also have the feeling that continuing education is actually becoming even bigger than campus education, in a sense that careers are becoming longer and continuing education is becoming more important. So to meet the needs of the labor market, we also have to think about complementary market mechanisms. We have to think about different than universities educating students separately. We are more thinking about clusters, sector-oriented education, which is more in line with the demands from the economy, and therefore structural collaboration is needed with the stakeholders in the market. So therefore, we bring together MOOC platforms, universities, public employment services, and in a structured, collaborative way to have offerings which are flexible and scalable for the continuing education market. Here summarized, you see that we are developing this framework to defining the role of MOOC platforms, universities, employment services together. We bring them together to co-develop, co-deliver, and using MOOCs and short learning programs for continuous education. And we have started with an analysis of the position of MOOCs for the labor market. That was the first part of this EMCLM project. And next to that, we strengthen the European platforms and sharing expertise and collaboration. Yeah, what is actually missing at this moment to make the big step for MOOCs being considered as a valuable educational resource for continuing education is the clarity of qualifications. So that is of utmost importance, not only for the learners, the university, but also for employers to really accept MOOCs and short learning programs, but to have an added value in the educational sector. At this moment, there is no consistency in these qualifications and actually leading to confusion. Here you have a table in which there is an analysis done about 450 MOOC-based micro-credentials, and there you already see a big difference in the length of courses, also in the credentials in the courses, and that is actually very much confusing, and therefore the value is not as big. It is for employees very difficult to see what the new employee is bringing to their company. So our ambition, therefore, of the European MOOC Consortium in relation to micro-credentials is to lay the foundation for a new qualification to address the needs of employers and learners looking for smaller units and that develop relevant skills. We want to enable courses to be recognized and stackable. And here you see the overview, which was also mentioned or referred to in the first presentation. This is the model, the Common Micro-Credential Framework. And this is not something that has come from one brainstorm. This has taken us quite some time to fix this framework in consultation with the higher education institutions linked to the MOOC platforms. In summary, it is about 150 hours workload, representing 4 to 6 ECTS, depending on the country. Important is the connection also with the European qualification framework, level 6, 7, but also 8, PhD level, and with the option of level 5, as long as there is a combination of ECTS, so at academic level. The need is there to provide assessments, enabling the award of an academic credit, reliability method of ID verification, and the transcript setting of the learning outcomes. This all feeds in to really being able to assess the value of this program with a micro-credential. Next is that, so the purpose summarized of the Common Micro-Credential is to encourage the development of a qualification that will better meet the needs of modern learners. The framework helps you to gain knowledge, skills at a high education level in smaller units, and it allows you for learning to be recognized towards formal qualifications in a seamless way. Here you see where it is positioned then. So you have, they are short courses. There are many of these short courses which receive certificate badges. We see micro-credentials more as the part of formal education, always with ECTS connected. So these are academic, formal education, higher education, and they are stackable towards degrees. I think it's even the same slide that was used in the, here FutureLearn already represents specifically programs, MOOCs, that are awarded with the CMF. This is our ambition is to have a growing number of programs in line with this, becoming more of a qualification, which for learners is really well a kind of a benchmark, so they know this is, when I follow this course, this is recognized, this is stackable and quality controlled. It's not only on FutureLearn, also on our other platforms of Fun, MicroHE X. So we will have this list of CMF awarded programs, like also was introduced with the DCU program of FinTech. To further formalize and mainstream our ambition here on CMF is that we have also a name for this qualification, which is called CADEO. This is not the only name. This is the name for CMF awarded programs, the CADEO, which is adopted by, at this moment, by MicroHE X, Edu Open, and Fun. This is not necessarily the name that also is being used by FutureLearn. This could be a different name. We are currently exploring this, but in the end, we will have a similar, like an ISO certification, CMF awarded programs under the name CADEO or different names. So we are working at the moment at this recognizability of these CMF programs, and also discussing it with the Commission and Europe. That is the state of affairs, and for us now, we are looking for further endorsement by more higher education institutions to work to recognize these programs, to develop programs in line with CMF, and for the Commission to also include this in Europe. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll give the floor back to the chair.
Thank you, George. If anyone has any questions for George, please go ahead and ask.
Just one question to George.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah, this is Joanne Silas from Geneva. And I noticed that at last slide, you have mentioned that on FUN, that this France Université Numérique, right? So the French MOOC platform. So I'm curious to know why you chose FUN to start with this project. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have looked for the bigger platforms in Europe, the MOOC providers, and these are typically more language bound. So we have French, Italian, Spanish, and UK-based FutureLearn. We do not exclude other platforms in Europe. So we are expecting also a German platform and MOOC to join soon. FUN has been very active in this field, and they have really felt the need to, as one of the first of our platforms that we represent, felt the need to have this as a registered name, this qualification. And they've taken this initiative of CADEO, which is now being registered under the brand name. So, and then they asked also for the other platforms to join the name of CADEO, and this is now done by MicroHE X and Edu Open. And the more platforms that endorse this qualification under CMF and under the name CADEO, the stronger, of course, the recognizability of CMF awarded programs. For now, for practical reasons, we only give CMF award programs to the programs under CMF, under the EMC platforms. So only for universities that are currently connected to these 4 platforms, or 5 platforms, including OpenAbet. And later on, we will expand this also for universities European-wide or even wider.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Ferenc, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. George, it was very, very mind-opening, your lecture. The previous presenter just mentioned that credit bearing means that micro-credential have the properties you just mentioned in your project also. So you just define the content of making it credit bearing, I think. But I do not understood what did you mean on that it is only for further education and not for degree course is a part of a degree course, or may I misunderstood this?
Yeah, no, that's correct, because yeah, you can these programs for continuing education often are coming from universities, and they are often also part of the bachelor programs, the campus-based programs. The only thing is that we actually install the micro-credentials to serve the markets for continuing education, because there the qualification is missing. So we have the bachelor, masters, the PhDs. We don't have a qualification that is recognizable and shows really the added value. There you have, in this market of continuing education, you have certificates and badges. And to solve that problem of recognizability and seeing the added value, we see a task for the micro-credentials for having a new qualification like CMF. Then you could have the discussion like, should we also give a CMF qualification for, let's say, a first or second year student at a university of 18, 19 years old? Then you have the discussion that could technically be possible, but then you are cutting up programs. And the question then is, aren't you very much stimulating for students to just finish their bachelor program as such, or then giving incentives of breaking that up and making it a whole collection of these micro-credentials. So therefore, at this moment, we think these micro-credentials are mainly meant for formal higher education, continuing education. The bachelor master system is already a well-functioning system and should stay as it is. The micro-credentials CMF qualification is meant for the market of continuing education where we are missing such qualifications. That is why we made that distinction.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. We also have a question in the chat from Corinne. Where is the validation coming for the EMC? Is it coming from the European universities or the EU Commission?
Yeah, so you mean the validation of CMF then? So the European Commission is now being involved to get further endorsement also from the European Commission, and we are also involved in this Commissioner's expert group on micro-credentials. So we are talking to the Commission on this. The validation is based on the endorsement by the universities connected to the European platforms, the European MOOC platforms, and the actual execution of the validation in certifying, so more or less the programs as being CMF, is then done by EDTU as the coordinator of the European MOOC Consortium on behalf of the 5 MOOC platforms. So you have this layer. EDTU is providing this qualification on behalf of the 5 MOOC platforms, representing more than 400 higher education institutions. So that is how the system works. But to keep it under control at this moment, we only apply CMF for those higher education institutions connected to EMC. And also we have a short learning programs initiative with EDTU, in which we have all the open universities connected within Europe. These programs are also applicable for CMF.
Okay, thank you, George. I hope that answered your question, Corinne. And if there are no more questions, we could proceed to the workshop part of this session. Okay, no more questions, I guess. So I know we've all had a lot of information overload today, but please bear with us for a few more minutes. Now I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the MicroHE project. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my video. But anyways, we have heard a lot about micro-credentials today. And if you've had the opportunity to attend some of the sessions this morning, I'm trusting that you are familiar with some of the terminology involved. So last year, we conducted a discussion among a gathering of experts from all over Europe in Slovenia. And the group was made up of some policymakers, some educators in the field, and even some tech companies. The discussions revolved around estimating what kind of impact microcredentials can have on various aspects of higher educational institutions, such as changing learner paradigms and inter and intra-institutional processes, among others. The participants then also tried to identify what would be the driving factors for such kind of impacts. In other words, how could we use technology and technology and policy making specifically as tools to drive those changes when it comes to microcredentials. We collected this information and refined it over time and came up with some of these impact statements and driving forces that could enable these impacts. And now in this workshop, we'll try to analyze some of those with you. Coming back to the practicalities, once you're assigned into groups, there will be 4 groups in total. You will be going to your own breakout sessions. And once you are there, you'll access this link that I'll just share with you, but I'll share my screen just to show you. Okay, so this is our workshop whiteboard, so to speak, and you can zoom in on every corner of this whiteboard. So there are 4 corners on this, each meant for different groups. So group 1 and 2 are on the top, and group 3 and 4 are on the bottom. You'll see that there are 3 of these impact statements that every group will have. And some of these drivers that we identified over here on top, all you have to do is go one by one through each statement and figure out the top 5 driving factors that you think would enable that particular statement from these. And once you have figured that out, you can just drag them over here in an order of importance. So if you think that including micro-credentials into Bologna process is the most important driving factor, then it goes to number 1. And just an example, and then you can just drag number 2 here. So it works like that. If you feel like some of the drivers here do not provide enough information, you can simply try to add a new note. All you have to do is go here, or maybe select a square, and just type your message, just showing how to do it. And it will be added here. And then you can just simply drag it to where you think it's important. So the main thing to remember here is to stick to your own corner of the group. We have enough space here for 4 groups. And please feel free to add any extra driving factors that you think are not mentioned in the list right next to remarks. I'll share the link for this in the chat. Just give me a second. So please feel free to access that link. And if you miss some instructions, they are on the board again, over on the Flinger board. And now Timothy will divide you into groups, and you'll be in your own breakout sessions for 20 minutes. Please, we encourage discussion and critical thinking. So please go ahead and start.
but the only thing is that we don't know which group are we, right?
Oh, we are. I think we are group 3.
Okay, so in that
So
case,
at least the title of the group mentions the 3.
okay, so that's clear then.
So we are the orange group.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen here. So here we have, and let me zoom in. I will need to show it a little bit more. Okay. Can you see it well now? Yeah, can we see it? Okay, so let's go for the first impact statement, which says that institutional openness towards microcredential has the potential to reduce the dropout. So here we will need to check which of the drivers we have in the top will contribute to this statement. You can open your microphone if you want to talk to guide me through this. For instance, I think that having building up upon existing infrastructure instead of reinventing the wheel could contribute, but that won't be the highest rank. I won't give it the highest rank. What do you think?
Well, I'm missing a little bit the student's perspective, I would say.
Okay.
So because okay, the dropouts, it's not only about the institution, but it's about opportunities for students. So
right.
So I would see also a different factor, maybe some kind of factor. Oh, how should I say? That there is the knowledge and acceptance with both students. I might just want to. Yeah, I could just add one. I have it open as well. So
you had it open. Good. So you will be adding it, right?
I will add it.
Okay. So okay, but we should change the color, otherwise it won't be. But okay, let's just change here the color, just to sign up that is a new one.
Oh
okay?
yeah, sure.
So other driver that will contribute making use of artificial intelligence to personalize the learning and teacher experience.
I would say it's important. It's not necessarily artificial intelligence, but like personalized learning would surely make it very useful. So
okay, so let's put it there. Next one, including microcredentials as part of the Bologna process.
Again, I would agree on that, because well, I'm from Germany, so we definitely have to look at also the recognition and accreditation issues, and it's quite useful. And I think this issue of a reliable platform, I think that's also quite important to allow the acceptance.
Okay, so we have already here 5. let's go then to the next statement. Okay, let's put it as a fourth. Okay, good. The second statement, micro-credentials will decrease the skill mismatch and enhance employability. Here, I think that it will be important to have European-wide trusted platforms, for instance, as Europass, that will allow us to have this information available. So the information about current specific skills will be available, and this could enhance the employability. I will put it here.
And I could drag a second one, because this one is definitely about the
Exactly.
connection
That's
between.
why I didn't put it as first one. Thank you.
All right. Okay. But it's currently a dialogue. How about
yes,
all the other colleagues?
I was just going to
So I will
comment
now
that,
shut up and shut my microphone down.
No, please don't. Otherwise, will be a monologue. The rest
No.
of participants.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I wasn't sure about that. He's Katharina, also from Germany, and I was already looking at the third statement. So I'm sorry, I don't want to speed up things or anything.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
No, just coming from, like a ministerial level, from the state level, I think for us, one of the most important things is that the national level strategies created in cooperation between ministries, higher education institutions and employers is also a very important point, and I was thinking about where to put it. And I'd rather have it on the third statement. I don't know if you'd agree. So
I will put them both in both statements. I mean, for the third, certainly it will go, but I will also
thank you very much.
second. I will also include it in the second one. Okay.
Thank you, Carmen.
You're welcome. Any other contribution? We still have 3 more. I cannot see the chat if I'm sharing the screen. Oh, okay. Yeah, was I comment asking if the process is clear? Yeah, it's clear, at least at this end. Okay, so to decrease to decrease the skills mismatch and enhance the employability. I think, let me put it this a little bit.
Sorry to interrupt you quickly, Carmen.
Yes.
I would really recommend that everyone unmutes their mic right now and make it an open discussion, because the end product that we would like to have here is based on a group consensus.
This is what we are doing.
Everyone discusses it.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Okay, so for the second statement, any other contribution you think that would be important to take into account? If you access to the link, you can also drag and drop if you don't want to talk or you can't. Great.
I would talk, but I would again see the personalized experience. But in this case, AI is really important when we look at new jobs or new job roles. Then we surely need some personalized learning and no standard curricula, because they are just too slow. So.
And agree with that. So we have, okay, let's move then to the third one that is somehow empty. Micro-credential could have a big impact helping students to prepare for jobs.
There I would see again the AI, because of the same reason I mentioned a minute ago.
Yes, it's the same rationale behind it, yes.
And there again, we need the commercial platform, I would say.
Exactly.
So if you don't mind, I'll just drag it down.
And I will keep also building on existing infrastructures. And I see that it will be interesting to keep the micro-credentials, the inclusion of micro-credentials into the Bologna process. What do you think?
Does it really help to anticipate further future needs?
If the processes, if the study plans keep the pace with the latest developments, it could be valid. Otherwise, it won't make much sense.
So it has as a prerequisite other instruments that should be included in the Bologna process, or
yes.
I would see more a kind of connection to other platforms, not to commercial employment platforms, but to something like labor market data, for example.
Yeah, so, that would be interesting.
Yeah.
I would just make a new one because that's a different issue than just commercial platform. Or well, when we have labor market data or some kind of trend reports or something like that, that could help us to predict stuff. So.
Yeah, but how does it connect to micro-credentials?
That's a good question.
Sorry, I don't mean to play devil's advocate, but
no. Well, but so the question is, how can we actually incorporate new trends? And we can, as I said before, I wouldn't see that there are new study programs planned for the labor market demands 5 years ahead. So we can only do it with like small offers, and it doesn't matter if it's micro credentials, but it's micro.
But there can like, be a way to for a quicker response to market labor, instead of creating a whole new program of study, master's degree or whatever. Micro credentials can be implemented a bit quicker, I think, and can react, maybe also address trends more quicker than study programs.
Right.
I don't know if I have been clear in my in my words, but yeah, sorry. But I think the idea is that with smaller portions of programs like micro-credentials, you can address some trends faster than other programs could do that.
So how would you formulate it? Maybe we can make another new driver.
I was just trying to link your connection to labor market data to micro-credentials. So I think it's just the link I was trying to explain for myself, if nothing else.
I think that other driver could be the European-wide trusted platforms. That it won't be on the same level as the previously mentioned, because we need to have first more information about this connection to the labor market and the trend reports and the national strategies. But having a wide trusted platform will also contribute.
Yeah.
Okay. Is any other driver that you think that it will contribute?
Well, so far I'm happy with the drivers, and we only
Okay.
have 2 minutes left, so
Okay.
we might find one more, but maybe not that many.
What about open bases?
Um,
Open bases and other credentialing technologies that enable transparency and recognition?
I don't see them as drivers. I see them, some of the drivers mentioned here are more like suggestions and not really what's behind a movement or behind something happening. So open badges could be a helpful instrument, but are they drivers? I don't think so.
Okay.
Would you say that open badges help help universities to reduce dropout rates or decrease skills mismatch or
Yeah.
anticipate future needs? I don't think they really link to the impact statements.
Okay.
But it's just my opinion. But maybe I'm seeing it wrong.
This is what we want. You want your opinions.
So, but anyway, Carmen and Jan, thank you very much for taking the lead. Because if you hadn't done it, yeah.
Then someone else would have done it. So
I think
I'm
so.
not sure. Everybody else has been pretty quiet.
all right, so I guess we are ready to return, or
I think so.
do we find more really exotic drivers?
Okay, so I see most of us are back. Okay, so I was just waiting because one group was still there. Yeah. So I hope you guys had some good discussion when doing this activity. I heard there was some confusion in the beginning, but it's good to see that the board is quite filled up and everyone found their way around it. And all the impact statements were different for each group. So please feel free to have this link. And if you want to the Flinger link, I mean, and if you want to look at the statements that the other groups went through and the drivers that they thought were more important, then you can access it. The board will remain open indefinitely. And thank you so much for your contribution, and thank you, Kanhar and George, for their presentations. And thank you to everyone who made it today and stayed with us till the end. It's quite late in the evening from work perspective, but we're very glad to have you. And thank you, Tim, for the technical support. I'll share the link to
Thank you
again.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.